I want to show you a feature that can allow us to bend images. And just to show you as a demonstration, I'll show you an image we're not actually going to make, but when we're done I can show you how it was made so that if you wanted to go to this extreme you could. Instead we'll do an image that might be something you would do more often. But here's an image I started with. And this has a flag on its own layer. And I want to show you what I ended up with, where it was completely done in Photoshop. You see that? This entire document from scratch was made all in Photoshop. And it doesn't use the 3D features of Photoshop at all. But what it does use is a feature in Photoshop that's designed for bending things. And as you can see, it's bending the flag. This is actually using two features, one that bends things and the other that adds lighting. Because if all you do is bend the flag, but it doesn't produce shadows and highlights to help define that shape, then it wouldn't quite look right. It just looked bent, but not as if there was any light falling on it. And it'd be kind of weird. So this uses two features. The thing that bends things is called a displacement map. That's what's making the flag actually move. And then the thing that's adding highlights and shadows to the flag is something called lighting effects. I primarily want to show you how to use the displacement map thing, the thing that bends it. But I thought this was a fun example, so I thought I'd show it to you. But since not very many people need to make a flag flap, I'm going to show you it in a different way. What I'm going to do is take this picture, and I'm going to bend something around my face. I want it to look like I have a tattoo covering my entire face. I'm like, you know, like Mike Tyson's got a big one there. Well, imagine I got it across my whole face. So I'm going to go choose something to bend around my face. And to make it so it's easy to tell if it's bent or not, I'll use something that's got a regular pattern to it, because then it's kind of easy to tell if it's bending. So I'm just going to take this layer and drag it over to the other file. And put it on top. It's a lot bigger, so I'm going to scale it down. I'll just type Command T. Command T means free transform. It's the same as going to the Edit menu and choosing free transform. This image is a lot bigger than the file that it's contained within. So when you do free transform, usually you get handles on the corners you can pull on. But right now, they're way beyond the edge of my screen. If I type Command 0, it'll zoom out until I can see them. And I'm just going to scale this down until it's appropriately sized for this image. Get it so it would cover up my skin. Then, to make it so I can easily modify our end result, I'm going to take this layer that contains whatever it is I want to bend, and I'm going to turn it into a smart object. There are two ways to turn things into a smart object. The first is to come up here to Smart Objects and say Convert to Smart Object. The second, which I use more commonly because it's just faster to get to, is to go to the Filter menu and choose that. They do the exact same thing. Both of them just convert your layer into a smart object. When you convert something into a smart object, you'll find it's got this little icon in the corner to tell you that it's special. Now, I'm going to turn off the eyeball for this layer, and we need to prep the thing we're going to bend this around, which means my face. What we're going to need to do is get a copy of this document. I'll do that by going to the Image menu and choosing Duplicate. It'll ask you for a file name, and we have a duplicate. Now we just want to simplify this image. I'm going to come in here and flatten the image, so if there's any layers in it, they're discarded. So I went to Layer, Flatten. Then I'm going to convert this image to grayscale to further simplify it. And then finally, I'm going to blur it. The reason why I'm going to blur it is because it's going to use the brightness of the image and interpret that as kind of a three-dimensional map of what the image looks like. What it's going to do is it's going to assume that bright things are closer to you and that dark things are further away. And if that's the case, it's going to think of all the pores in my skin as little drill holes, which I guess they are, but I don't want it to bend the pattern so precisely that it goes into my pores. Make sense? I want it to stay smooth. So in order to do that, I'm going to blur this until you can't see the fine detail, but you still have the overall tonality that's there. So I'll just go to Gaussian Blur, And I don't want it that high, because there you can't recognize anything. I want it just high enough to get rid of the fine detail so that the skin looks completely smooth. Maybe right around there, so all the pores go away. Then I need to save this image, the blurry black and white version, and I'm going to save it in Photoshop file format and just put it somewhere where I'll remember. So I'm putting mine on my desktop, so it's easy to get to. Photoshop file format, then you can close that file. Now we're back to the original file we had, and now we can work on the layer that contains our pattern and turn its eyeball back on. Now what we're going to do is somehow feed Photoshop that grayscale picture that I saved to my desktop and tell it to bend this layer based on it. And the way you do that is you choose Filter, choose Distort, and choose Displace. This comes up, and the two numbers that are in there determine how mountainous your bending will be. Meaning that if it was similar to a sheet of paper, are you going to bend it the tiniest bit where you could barely see the change, or are you going to bend it where it's sticking up really high? You know, if it's, how high should it extend? And you're kind of going to guess here. And if you end up having too much in your end result, you'll just choose Undo. You'll come back in here and use a higher or lower number, try it over again. I'm just going to use 50. Somewhere between 30 and 50 is just a good starting point. But it depends on how high resolution the picture is and how mountainous the subject matter is. You know, how much does it stick out towards you? The settings at the bottom mainly matter if the thing that's saved on your hard drive, that blurry grayscale picture, is a different size than this picture here. Since ours is a perfect duplicate of it, the settings at the bottom don't really matter. So I'm going to click OK, and when I do, it'll ask me for a file, and I'll give it that file. Now it just bent that layer. I'll zoom up on it. You can see little hints of where my eyes would be here. My eye would be there, a little hint of my nose, but it's really hard to tell if it's bent properly or anything. And the reason for that is it has no shading. You're used to seeing, like if you saw a sculpture of something, that it's the highlights and the shadows that largely define its shape. And this is lacking the highlights and shadows. There is a filter we could use to add the highlights and shadows, and it's called lighting effects. And lighting effects can also be fed the same grayscale picture to tell it the three-dimensional quality of this, and it would use it to add shadows and highlights. But I wanted this to look more like a tattoo, which means I'm going to use my original face and print it on it. So let's print this on my face now. I'm going to change the blending mode from normal to multiply, because multiply mode acts like ink. If it acts like ink, then it's going to be a lot like a tattoo. It's going to print on my face, and let's see what happens. Now, if we look closely at this, look at the pattern. Can you see it bending there where my cheek would be? Can you see it coming around this part of my cheek? You see it kind of bending around my lip that's there? But it's got some bending. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's usually good enough to give it the impression that it's been bent around. And what I want to do now is just make it so we're not tattooing the background and to finesse the look of it. So what I'm going to do is add a mask to this. So I'm clicking on the layer mask icon. And I'll paint with black to hide this wherever I don't want to see it. So I'll get it off my hat. And what I might do is just hide that layer and work on what's underneath and use something like the quick selection tool to just select the sky. Get it selected. It's fine if part of my hat gets selected because I don't want the stuff on my hat. I'll turn that layer back on, and with the mask active, painting with black on the mask is what hides things. So I'll say fill the selection that's here with black. Watch the mask, you'll see. See there. That's the equivalent to me painting in all those areas to get rid of it. I happen to use the quick selection tool to help me. And I'll get it off my hat because I can see little hints of it in there. It might be nice. I've yet to see anybody with their eyeballs tattooed. So, yeah, I'm sure we'll see it eventually. I'm sure. So I'll paint on the mask with black where my eyeballs are. Usually I'd be a little bit more careful, but that's just if you want to spend more time. And then to get it to look a little better, what I'll do is I'll lower the opacity so it's not so dark at the top of my layers panel. And I usually like to, if I want it to look like a tattoo, is I build it up by using different blending modes. To build it up, what I can do is duplicate the layer that contains our pattern that we have. I'll type Command J to jump it to a new layer. And then I'll experiment with different blending modes. Usually overlay or soft light will also help. Here we go. And there's a way to actually cycle through all those blending modes to see which ones would be useful. If you're in the Photoshop's Move tool, you can hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and then hit plus or minus, and you can cycle through that menu. All it's doing is changing the menu that's found at the top of my Layers panel. And if I find a look that I like, maybe I like this one called Vivid Light, it's just a little too strong, I'll lower the opacity on it to get it down to the right amount. Then I can duplicate the layer again, Command J, and try another mode. And I'll bring the opacity back up. Shift and hitting the plus sign. Ooh, that looks funky. It's like nighttime. Ooh, what's that? Hue. But usually using a few different blending modes and varying their opacity. There'll be too much oftentimes, and so by lowering the opacity, we can vary it. Maybe if I like color dodge, I might like it down at like 5 or 10%. There. I find that often looks better than having just one blending mode like multiply mode. Building it up can be nice. Now my mask wasn't all that precise. I can see the pattern over here. Can you see a hint of it in the sky? I think what happened is I had a shade of gray when I was painting because I can see over here some grayness instead of all black. If you end up doing this where you have more than one layer like that, the problem is that mask that you have is going to be duplicated. So now making changes to it is difficult because you'd have to change all 3 of these masks. You can cheat though if you put all of these layers in a folder. Just select them, click on the folder icon, and then open that folder. We can drag one of the masks to the folder to put it there, and drag the other ones either to the trash or just actually right-click on them and just say delete that mask. Right-click, delete that mask. So now what we actually have, I'll simplify this by collapsing down a few things, is we have 3 copies of our texture. They're in a folder, and the mask is there controlling all 3 of them at once. But it all depends if you're comfortable using layer masks or not, as far as being able to control that. Oops. I need to paint with black. My foreground color was set to a shade of gray when I was painting, and that made it so that when I was trying to hide things, it wasn't completely disappearing. But there we go. So you can take anything. This looks interesting with wood grain because you can notice the wood grain bending and all that, but you can get a good sense for it. If you need to make it where you're not tattooing it or putting it on top of another image, and you want to get the 3-dimensional quality of it, you'd also have to apply the lighting effects filter to get shadows and highlights added. The lighting effects filter has a feature called, I think, the texture channel. And that's where you can feed it the black and white picture. And if you do, then when it adds highlights and shadows to the image, it will think of it as 3-dimensional. And that's what I did with a flag to get the shading. Questions about displacement maps. You need to create a simple black and white image. We got rid of layers, we got rid of color, we got rid of fine detail. Saved it in Photoshop file format. The way we applied it is we went to Filter, Distort, Displace. It asked us for a number. It actually asked us for 2 numbers. You always type in the same number for both. Otherwise, it will distort the image horizontally differently than vertically. If you type in the same numbers, then the horizontal and vertical is an equal amount. So only fancy people get into putting in different numbers. But the higher the number, the more mountainous, the more it bends things where it's sticking out. And the lower the number, the more subtle the bending. All right?
Looking good.
Good. I'm going to save that just in case I want to get to it later. And so with the flag, I created, in order to get it to flap, I created multiple images. They looked like this. The way displace works is bright things are thought of as being close to you. Dark things are thought of as being far away. 50% gray is not moving at all. So this would push the flag towards us. This would push the flag away from us. And I had more than one of these. All it did was move like this. So the flapping, moved down the flag. To keep the flag attached to the flag pole, so it didn't break away from the flagpole, I put 50% gray in these two spots where it would touch the flagpole, so that there 50% gray means don't move me, and therefore it stayed pinned to the pole. But that's why these corners never really moved. But it all depends how far you want to go when it comes to getting fancy. But you see how these corners didn't move? That's because in those files I was feeding it, there was 50% gray put on the corners to hold the flag there.